This is Katie Walker. I am here today with Adam Marr, and we are talking about how we are changing the narrative of mental health.
I'm introducing you now to Lion's Mane. Lion's Mane is amazing for cognitive improvement. If you are feeling kind of fuzzy, grayed out, you need more focus, Lion's Mane is an excellent option. They're even utilizing this substance with pediatrics as young as 4 years old. So you have a kid who's starting to, you're worried about behavioral issues and such, look up Lion's Mane. It's a natural supplement and it's allowing improvement in your cognitive function.
I am here with Rethink with Revitalist with one of my co-hosts today that I'm very excited about. So you'll get to see Adam in a lot more series besides this one. And with this one today, this is going to be my most vulnerable podcast. And unfortunately, people like it when I'm vulnerable. And as everybody knows, it's kind of hard to do. So I'm here today with somebody who I highly trust, highly respect, talking about a very sensitive topic that we're going to put words to and hopefully help a lot more people out there that may be going through situations that I have once lived. So Adam Marr, thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, Katie, it's a pleasure to be here. It's an incredible studio. Really excited about diving into this. In no way, shape, or form am I an expert on what we're going to talk about today, but I am a married man, and I've been through quite a lot with my spouse within the military, and so I think it's a really important thing that we're talking about, and happy to shed some light onto it today.
So this is all raw, people. All raw with Katie and Adam. So we're going to talk today about domestic violence. And I just sprung this on Adam just a few minutes ago. So he's very excited.
That's right. Well, let's dive in. We're going to do a podcast. We're going to do a couple today. And the first one is domestic violence. Let's jump in.
No pressure.
I mean,
no pressure.
So why is this topic so important to you? Like, why tackle this? Why talk about it?
So I went through this situation a while ago. It's been over a decade that I went through this. But when I was in it, right, and I'm not an idiot. I'm a nurse, undergrad nurse. I'm trained on abuse, all this other stuff, right? I have the specific training. I had my master's degree. I was in the process of getting my first master's degree in anesthesia, and I was in this situation, and it was so gray, Adam, like. You didn't know like who to ask for help. A lot of times when you did go ask for help, people thought that you were like crying wolf, that you're too sensitive. So it would go from, asking for help and people be like, oh, it's you probably brought it on yourself. I heard that so many times, like you brought this on yourself. Like you knew his personality, and that you would get that, or you would get people so scared, like at the university that I went to. They actually asked me to transfer universities because they were afraid of him because he'd actually came on to the property. And, and so I had those things too. Like, no, this is fine. Like everybody's going to be fine, so it went from one extreme to the other. It was really hard to kind of the details, right? To be very objective because it is very an emotional situation. And you're trying to figure out, is it you? Is it them? Like, who is it? And then when you go down this path with domestic violence, not only is it hurting you from like a personal, spiritual, emotional level, but then, we had a child involved, right? And she was about 1.5 years when all of this started. And it becomes a target, right? So she's this most precious package in between someone who's extremely trained in the military and then somebody who has a strong personality like me. So you've got like two little bombs in this little tiny package. And when each feels a threat, right, that's when each goes into protection mode and they shut down and they go through their best training ever, but you become the target. So I always tell people, when they work with these high-ranking military guys, you always want them to be on your side. You don't want to be their target. And when you are, it teaches you a lot about yourself because the truth is not there anymore. It comes from the way data is interpreted in the brain and how did they see the truth? So, I think I've been to court maybe 40 times now. I think I've spent about $500,000 in court costs in the last 12 years. I think the last time I went to court was in 2022. My daughter's 14 now. This started when she was 1, So, but hearing all these different things, learning about orders of protection, learning about domestic violence shelters, learning about things that are actually out there to protect you, um, I didn't know anything about. And especially when you have this, very trained military person who also has several like master's degrees and different things like that. When they're the first ones that go to the courts to file, and then I'm in school, he was always right initially for about 2.5 years. He was right. And I couldn't get anything passed. And the only thing that the judge heard, right, because I was in anesthesia school, and she thought I was in school to be a nursing assistant. And she's like, "You're just a nursing assistant. That's what you're going for." I was like, "No, I'm going for anesthesia." And she had no idea what that meant. But when she saw my contract, because when I got out of school in 2014, my base pay was like $150,000. It all changed. I then became like this amazing female who's here to sponsor her child and support her child. But along the way, there was so much confusion, so much anger towards myself that I didn't see it. I didn't recognize it. But then also, learning how to forgive myself with grace and things like that too. So anyway, want to do, the podcast today with this to try to break it down a little bit. So people can kind of understand, like, if they are in a bad situation, what do you do? Right? Because at times, I mean, my life was in danger. I mean, I had police officers and lieutenants tell me that I needed to leave my house. I had domestic violence people tell me I needed to leave my house. I had a therapist tell me that I was in immediate danger, that I needed to go report certain things. And it's interesting because when you go through these things, like the one therapist who said, "I need you to go report this now." And I was like, "Okay, like it's been going on for 3 months. Like I'm all right, And she's like, "No, I need you to go report it now." So I went to report it. Domestic violence lady came over that day, tried to get me to go to domestic violence shelter. And then she went to his house to interview him. So as soon as she went to his house to interview him, guess what happens? He then reports me for the same thing.
Counters.
Yep, all counterclaims. And when they do that, unfortunately, the courts just throw it out. They just look at it as a high conflict, and
throw yours out, or throw his out, or throw both out.
Both
Okay.
out. Yeah, we just don't like each other.
Because now they're like it's contested, or
yeah. There's nothing
they're
here.
just using lawfare.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because I did this twice. I started in the case in Charlotte, North Carolina, when I was in school there, and I had to go. Like I had 5 days off in anesthesia school in 3 years. All 5 days were in court.
That's healthy.
It was. Yeah, people would look at me. I'd be like either losing weight, gaining weight, just looking like crap, right? But people also told me that like being in anesthesia school during that time of extreme stress was actually good because it taught me like I had to take my mind off of this because at times, right, like my daughter would be missing. She was 1 years old, or 2. I mean, I guess she was 4 when I graduated anesthesia school. So it started when she was 1, went to when she was 4. And, sometimes she'd be missing from school. And it would be on my day, right? When she'd be missing from school.
What do you mean missing from school?
Like he would go pick her up.
Oh, okay.
And just tell them like it was her day or whatever, his day. And then I would like lose my mind thinking that.
And you wouldn't know that.
No. So it was things like that, right? But then he's like,
I don't want to like gloss over that. That's absolutely huge for like you to be unclear where your 1-year-old
where your child is,
daughter is. Absolutely.
Yep.
And it sounds like there was a significant amount of things going on, like a young daughter, this relationship that's turning, toxic and abusive in the ways, and also like taking on a significant like workload. But like your husband was in the military?
Fortunately, we were never married.
Okay. Your partner.
Yeah. No, yeah, he was. So he was military police K-9. And then he went and worked for Blackwater, Triple Canopy XE, through their whole transition.
And was he doing any of that work while you guys were together?
The whole time.
Okay.
The whole time. So where did I mess up? I messed up a lot. But no, he was in Mosul, Baghdad, all those different pieces. And then he came back in June. He was going to quit. He was stopping being a mercenary and then was coming back to be a stay-at-home dad while I was anesthesia school, right? Because anesthesia school, it's like it's 80-hour weeks. You're at the hospital at 4 a.m., and like I said, you get 5 days off in 3 years. A lot of people don't make it. There was 24 people that actually were in my anesthesia class out of about 7,000 applicants. So you did not show any weakness at any time, right? So here I am thinking this guy may kill me. He may kill my child. I have no idea, right? My home got broken
Why were you
into.
thinking that he may kill you, that he may kill your child? Like, what were the conditions that had, and like, what were some of like the warning signs, maybe that you saw, and maybe you didn't see them until like after an event, had occurred. And I think maybe the tie that would be good to make, at least because I know you've probably thought about it, is the things that he went and did for the military and how he came home, or maybe how he didn't come home. How did those things like materialize in him to be able to like start having the relationship with you in that way that those events transpired?
And I think that's the big thing, right? Is like, this isn't about like me versus him or him versus me kind of stuff. It's the training that either party received, right? And me, like, I'm a big empath. People may not know that, but I am. I have very big lack of boundaries. If you ask me to do something, and if I think it's for the greater cause of, I'm going to do it. And I tell people all the time, I said, I will abuse myself first before I allow any other people to be abused. Clearly, that's true. But I think the big piece with that, right, is I always admired, right? And I've told you before, like when I'm sitting around all these amazing military guys, I'm like, I'm in a room of greatness and of people that are like badasses, right? And I love that. Like, I love the freedom, the structure, just like, just seeing like people execute. Like, I'm so attracted to that. I mean, think about this. My daughter's father was a mercenary. My ex-husband's a heart surgeon, right? Like, some reason I'm attracted to like this like undeniable leadership power skill set. And it's good and bad, to a point, but I never, ever looked at his training as this is probably something that we need to look at to make sure that we can integrate better when you do come back from civilian life, because I hit people head on whenever I want to argue. And, but it was little things, right? Like, I gave him a lot of control. He always admired me. Like, he always said, you're like the greatest. Like, I didn't, flowers. I didn't get flowers for one day. I got flowers for an entire week. Like, we traveled to Italy for a month at a time. I would take off, when I was a nurse, I'd take off. We'd do cross-country trips for a month at a time. Like, everything was amazing, right? But it's because he would do 90 days in Iraq and then come back home for 30 days. So everything was fantasy world. And when you're a military person and you're over there, good, bad, or ugly, it is kind of like fantasy world over there. It's not paying a mortgage, cleaning your floors. It's not all the mundane things that a lot of the civilians are attracted to. So I'm sure there's a change in dopamine levels.
Well, it's this constant kind of like honeymoon phase / like longing, like separation. So the cycle oftentimes is, you're home, you're doing training, you're getting ready for whatever deployment. You're not going to be there that long. Maybe you have to leave and come back even when you're home, right? So it's this, hey, I miss you, I love you, like I can't wait to see you again. Separation, like go and focus on your wartime tasks, mission, and training. Meanwhile, you're essentially a single mother, or single in the relationship. And then it's oh, I'm so excited to see you again. We missed you so much. Like, let's go and do this thing and be here and show our expression, because we only have this small amount of time before we have to do it again. And if you're in that cycle, in that loop for, years, and in some cases, decades, in some cases, you've never had a sustained period of like relationship with that person doing the mundane things of life. And so that can be hard, because like once like ultimate separation happens, or once you enter into that phase of life, you're like, you don't know how to do life together. And if that person is trying to unpack all those things that they went and experienced, or maybe they're not even trying to unpack them yet, but they're just like reacting to them and they're experiencing them, it's because they don't have the tools and the capability to handle that yet, let alone the relationship they're in. So there's like a whole big thing that's going on, and maybe even doing things that they don't realize that they're doing, or negative behavior traits, and causing harm in ways that they're not even aware of. and maybe you're not even aware of at first, because it sounds like, some of these things you're like, okay, am I really messed up? Like, what do I have to do? Like, how am I out of balance with this person? And I need to start looking at how I fix these things and start pleasing them and making them happy. And then there's probably like, I'm also hearing there, well, you think of domestic violence and you think like, just physical violence, right? But that's just one part or component of it. And maybe even in some cases, like the more damaging and less seen that can go on longer is the psychological aspect or component.
Yeah. Well, and I looked that up, right? Because, mine was all psychological. And I had something called battered wife syndrome that I didn't know about until I was in my other relationship. And he called me out on it because he was like, can you cut up some peppers for dinner? I was like, all right. And I'm like cutting up peppers. And I'm like, is this okay? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, is this size okay? And he's like, yes. I'm like, what about this? Like, I asked him like 5 questions about cutting up a pepper. And he stopped and he was like, just cut the pepper. And I was like, but I don't want to mess it up. And that's actually, that's what he said. He was like, I think you have battered wife syndrome, because what happens, right, is like, I guess when you're in the military, you're in a structure, you're in an environment of chaos. So you're trying to control that, right, at all times. Well, then you come back and you're still kind of in this chaotic environment. It's different, but it's a different type of chaos.
You're trying to control everything.
And you're trying to control everything, So, nothing was ever good enough, right? Everything was very gray. And I think that was the confusion. But looking at abuse, because I was trying to figure out all this stuff, right? Because I went to ask, like I said, I went to ask people, and nobody knew how to put words on it, like at all. And you feel so lost. You're like, is it me? Like, am I crazy? Because, he would say, like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know. Maybe there is something wrong with me, And, but it became stupid, like stupid. But meaning that, like, we'd be talking at dinner. Oh, your wife would love this. Talking at dinner, group of like 6 people. Hey, Adam, what's your sex life like? Because mine and Katie's, it's really non-existent. But like, we used to have a sex life, but what is yours like at dinner? And I'm like sitting there, all the women like look at all the guys. They're like, what the hell is this, right?
Yeah. Pasta or Mexican food?
Italian. It was an Italian.
Oh, okay.
It was at,
maybe felt more comfortable broaching that subject because it was Italian
Italiano.
food. No, it's incredibly embarrassing.
It well, not only embarrassing, but it would destroy. That's what they did over time, right? And I can go through all of them. I will. So it's like my hands are too small. My fingers look weird. My ears are too pointy. My accent's too weird. My stories are too long. People think I'm boring.
These are your thoughts, or these are things that
he physically told me these things over time. Yeah. I like, as soon as I like had my child, I was so excited because I finally fit into a pair of jeans. And he was like, you look like a marshmallow with a rope tied around you. And I laughed, and I got so pissed off at myself later on that I laughed at that. And I was like, here was a huge accomplishment, right? I just pushed out a human from my body. And then to
one of the
have
most sacred, incredible things that you can do that literally sustains life on this planet.
Right. But to tell, somebody with the marshmallow with a rope tied around him. But I was told that I was a good breeder. Again.
Yeah.
Thank you. So when I go up for sale in the future, I can sell my eggs to Elon Musk. I would probably consider that.
He might be buying.
I'm a good breeder. I have a 5-star review.
Yeah.
But it was things like that, right? And then I was like, is this normal? Like, does this guy love me? Like, what is all this crap, right? And I think the biggest thing, so the psychological abuse, it was little things like that over time. If they saw your confidence, and this happens in business, this has happened to me in business as well. Initially, they love your confidence. You are so amazing. I have never seen anything like you, you know? And they love your confidence. And they want to work alongside you.
Yeah.
And then that working alongside, usually, there's either it's a leader or a follower per se. And a lot of times they'll start getting intimidated by your confidence level, and they'll start trying to control you. And they can't control you when you start pushing against that. That's when the situation gets worse. So like psychological abuse compared to physical abuse, because I discovered this years later, right? Psychological abuse usually turns into homicide. Physical abuse usually turns into suicide.
Oh, wow.
So you think about, right, the school shootings. It's usually psychological abuse
Right.
that turns into that. Because I
So they
was
push
trying
to
to,
their psychological breaking point until they take action.
it's extrinsic, right? It's extrinsic energy going out for violence versus
And
the
somebody so
intrinsic.
physically built on the outside takes action to internalize that and end it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I discovered that. But I think the biggest thing, there's this book, I hate the name of it. Gosh, I hate the name of it, but I'm pretty sure it saved my life going through this, but it's called Psychopath-Free. And it's how to heal from an emotionally toxic, maybe it's emotionally narcissistic relationship. And what you have to do, right, with people that are severe narcissists. And this is, we did get psychological evaluations because I would be in court and I was like, I would hear a story. I'm like, none of that took place, like ever. I'm going to court thinking if I get a fact wrong from 12 years ago, they're going to throw me in jail. So I'm like trying to do everything completely correct. So I have a horrible, guilty conscience. And, but yeah, his stories would be completely false. So I asked for the psychological evaluation. And that's when I found out, what a grandiose narcissist is. Then with those pieces, right, those are the people that are right below God. And unfortunately, some of the military guys, right, the government doesn't apply to them because they're bigger than that. They're the ones that are protecting the government per se.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're going up against somebody like that, it's really, really hard. So I learned with narcissists, right? You can never get on a narcissist level. And we all have some type of narcissism, right? Everybody likes to throw around the word narcissist. But a narcissist is someone who sees your emotions and they play your emotions against you.
Yeah.
So if I see that something made you sad, and then I get into a situation to where I want to make you sad, I will entangle that and use that as a weapon against you.
Do you think it's something because like the narcissist is able to like see these things and they haven't been able to like realize what to do with them, and so because of what they've experienced, they're this hurt person that's trying to protect themselves, and because they have like these skills or abilities, then they think, and because the way the world if they're really listening says like I need to look out for number one, I need to look out for myself, so I should be taking these things to be able to use them, leverage them in whatever way possible to protect and elevate myself. And maybe like that's what's happening like in these situations and scenarios, and they don't even really realize it. Because I think if I'm being like completely honest, like that was probably like what the type of narcissist that I was. And a lot of these like things on the psychological front like are ringing true for me at like my marriage in one point or another, like ashamedly so, but also I think because I was naive to it, because I thought and like I was looking for this validation and protection of self, and I didn't really have the tool set and the capabilities to decouple from some of these things. So like even so much so that like we were just recently moving some of our stuff from Texas to Alabama, and I had to go out there, and my wife and I are coming up and we're celebrating our 14th year of marriage. Like we started off, like most couples, like, very quickly, in love. And then there was a deployment like right away, 5 months into our marriage. And we made the decision to either have like 5 months together being married or do like a 2-year engagement. And, when you're young and in love, it's, you want to be with that person right then and there. So then I went and I did our, wartime task and mission, found out as I got there that we were pregnant with our first child. And that wasn't our plans, and it's very devastating news, but also an exciting time. And so like the challenges like started like right there. And coming back after the deployment, having being focused on, what I had to do over there versus, she did this beautiful thing of growing this child inside of her, having it while I was away, delivering it. And then I'm like coming home to a 3-month-old. Well, we like in me mentally and emotionally, like, I was a newlywed. And here she is, with a 3-month-old, and she's completely transformed. So we were out of sync, and I was still growing, learning, and developing, and, could sense and understand people. And as we got more out of alignment, then I tried to get her in alignment with me by using whatever I had at my disposal and resources. And the more that we got out of balance, like the more toxic that could become, to the point where like it was never anything physical. But I know now, and my wife would probably be a great guest, maybe not so for me to talk about all the things. And but you don't know till you know, right? And so to go back to, like, I was moving some books and I found a box that was like her bedside stuff, and there was a book in there about like how to like work with a narcissist. And I was like, what the hell? I'm not a narcissist.
Who is she talking to?
And I look in there and she had this like journal entry, and I mean it made me cry to like go back into that like part of our marriage and realize like what I was putting through and what she was getting in a partner in me, with 3 kids. And it was heartbreaking because I had, and probably like your husband too, like so much love, for you as a person. But I realized that it was things that I needed to work out inside of myself, and things that I needed to realize, and things that I needed to overcome, and a lot of that was the work that we do now within the veteran mental health space, and being able to have access to these psychedelic assisted therapies, and being able to get outside of yourself, outside of time or outside of your environment. Those are the 3 major catalysts that you need to change. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in this repetitive, all these thoughts coming in, but you don't know that you have ownership of your thoughts. Then you're going to take these free will choices or actions, on your thoughts. And then those actions over time are going to produce certain behaviors. Those behaviors create the experiences that we have. And if you have a good experience, a bad experience, whatever, there's going to be an emotional response, tied to that. So this is the loop that we exist in. It creates our personal reality, right? And this is kind of getting into some Joe Dispenza stuff, if folks have heard of it. And then there's everything in your past that you can no longer go back and do. It's all these events that led you to this present, like now moment of who you are. And then there's like a future, that's not yet here. And until you learn some of these things, or have some of these therapies, or work with somebody, like yourself in a ketamine clinic, having the opportunity to get outside of yourself, your environment, your time, with a will or an intention to change. Only then can you start changing this cycle of thoughts, actions, behaviors, emotions, experiences into what you want to become. And so that was very much like the process for me. And when I was able to really start going inward and looking at all the things that maybe I didn't like, or asking the questions of like, why do I exist like this? What am I here for? How am I going to live my life? What are my values and systems? What are the things I don't want to do anymore? And really understanding those, and having a community, and then time to be able to step into this new version of yourself. It was only then that I could realize like these things that I had done to her in the past, out of just like trying to protect what I thought was us and myself, or getting her to see things, my way. So I can relate a lot, unfortunately, to the other version of like what you're sharing today.
Yeah, no, right. And you talking about that, like, it made me think, right? Because he came back in June. It was Thanksgiving Day when I said I'm done, right? And I'm not that person. I don't give up. But there was 3 pretty significant events right before that, and I was so confused, and none of it made sense. And all of a sudden, like, we had the talk. I was like, listen, like, I'm never going to be able to make you happy. It doesn't matter what I do. You just don't like me. And unfortunately, like, I mean, in the States, like I was probably safety. I was going towards a good job, all this stuff. But it was clear that, maybe at one time he liked me. I'm sure he did. But at that
sure
time, it was, he didn't, like I told him, I said, there's nothing I can do. And I've tried everything, probably looking back on that at that time. Because who knows, right? Who knows how long the honeymoon phase lasts? We moved from Tennessee to Charlotte between June and November. Anesthesia school started in August, so it was the week before. That was a heavy week too. I talked about a heavy week yesterday on a podcast the other day. But my grandmother died. We broke up on like Thanksgiving. My grandmother died gosh, like, I don't know, 3 days later. And then we buried her on like the weekend. And then I had finals, anesthesia school finals, my first finals ever the next week.
That's a lot.
It was
Like a lot, you know?
like I showed up. I didn't complain. But you know, who knows? Like maybe if the people, if, people like me who are with military people, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he had been working in Iraq back and forth for so many years, and here he comes June and he's done, right? He's like, nope, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to do all this stuff. And, he probably got pretty depressed during that time. I'm guessing it became much more controlling, from me. So I'm guessing that that's how he was balancing that, like it was, I
have less control over these things, so I'm going to control my relationship more, control her more. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it did become much more controlling, and I'm not one that likes to be controlled too much. So at that time, like, maybe it would have been better to be like, okay, listen, this is the longest you've been home in years. It's like, maybe you should go back. Why don't you go do another 90 days? Let's try to work on this while you're over there, and maybe that would have been a good way to look at it, and just to try to see the skills. Unfortunately, my communication skills at that time probably weren't great. And it was, my dog, kind of the kicker that got me was my dog at the time. He was a Shepherd Lab mix. Great dog. Probably, I think Bear was maybe 9 or 10 at the time. And I get a text. I'm in anesthesia school, and I get a text from, the guy I was with. And he was like, hey, I broke something. And I had this vase from Italy that I paid a lot of money for years ago. And I was like, oh God, he broke my vase. And I came home just knowing that my vase was broken. And it wasn't. It was a kitchen cabinet that was shattered on the base. And he told me that Bear slid through it. And yeah. But Bear didn't slide through things. I mean, he did canine in the military, and he didn't know how to convert the skills that you use for canine in the military towards a house dog that's 10 years old at home.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting there were some physical things that happened there to bust the cabinet with the dog. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is super atypical. Like, there's never been any type of physical aspects with us going on. So me knowing now, I would have reached out, and maybe asked that we both get help. We both look at it. Instead, he was, next day was Thanksgiving or something. And on the way, we were driving from Charlotte back to Tennessee for Thanksgiving. And he was telling me how I needed to be taught a lesson. Again, not a great statement to say to a female,
or anyone.
As to, right, that I need to be,
listen,
that I need to be taught a lesson on how self-centered I was because I wanted to put out Christmas decorations 2 weeks before he wanted me to. And that's when we had the conversation, right? On the way back. It wasn't like, how are we going to work this out?
So it was after Thanksgiving.
It was on Thanksgiving Day.
But you wanted to put Christmas decorations like that. I think that's a reasonable. I think people may need to be taught a lesson if they put Christmas decorations before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I know some people are about it like after Halloween. Like, well, it's fair game.
I had my one day before finals to put them out, and I put them out. I actually did ask for permission, which again, completely not my personality now, but I did. I was conditioned well. But fortunately, after my daughter and I put them out for like an hour and a half, right? You've got 3 kids. So when the kids are little, right, they're just crazy. They're running around with ornaments, like they got them in their mouth. Like, it's just like a puppy running around. And that's what she was doing. So we get them all out. And then I put her in the bathtub, get her ready for bed. And I come out, and they're all put back up in the attic. And that's when I told you things happened. I was just confused. And so that's why he was trying to teach me a lesson. He wasn't helping me at all the next day with the kid or anything like that. And but because I was self-absorbed with wanting to put out Christmas decorations early. So it was just dumb, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just stupid stuff to where you're just like, what is
But stuff like that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Consistently. Right. But towards the end, especially.
Yeah.
Lots of gray. To where now it would be like, okay, let's go talk to a therapist. Let's do some couples counseling.
Right.
What did I do? Hey, man, you don't like me. I'm done.
Right.
Let's separate.
But then you got to a point where you're like, okay, like, whether you knew all the things that you know about what was happening to you now, or you were beginning to discover them and learning that some of these things, like, had a name that the way in which he was, treating you and behaving, like there was a name for that as well. Then there became a decision point for you to separate. And then it was this like new path. And I can only imagine that, from point of separation, like there's still an incredibly challenging, like trying time for somebody who's like been through all these things. Like what was the transition period like after separation like, and were there, when did you start finding like resources to be able to help you? And, also thinking about somebody maybe out there today, that's recognizing that they're experiencing some of these things. And so I really like that you're like, oh, well, if I would have known, like maybe there's a way, that we could have, saved that. And I think most people like do want to try and, save it if they can. I know like that was the case with my wife and I, which was like, I was very fortunate. And then I saw my younger brother go through a terrible divorce, and I saw this incredible torment of him having separation like from his children. And I think like at the core, when it was the worst between my wife and I was just like, I'm going to leave, and like life will just be better if I can like remove her from the equation. But like I was like, a future without my kids would be miserable. So like that was the reason that I found to be able to stay and try and do whatever I could to start repairing. But yeah, like what was that like post separation into like this new growth and healing in yourself?
If I could have done it all over again, right? One, we didn't have relationship skills to stay together. And then we both just like, get out, I hate you kind of thing, and actually he wanted to still live with me and have kids, but date other people. And I'm like, I just don't think that's healthy. Like, but anyway, but if I could have done it over again, even if I didn't like him and I didn't want to salvage the relationship, the number one thing, and again, this goes out the window if there's physical abuse and if your life is at risk. But if you're in a relationship where you just don't like each other, even if you don't think it's going to work, go to a couples therapist and start learning skill sets to try to get you all together while that barrier is not there, right?
Mhm.
Because once that barrier came
Right.
out, it became like,
The
at
separation
all
barrier.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, showing up at my school, showing up at the hospital that I worked in Knoxville years later, right? Just random things to where it's just like, yeah, you do feel threatened for your life. But I would tell people, when you're in the situation, it's like, just try to go get help. Try to build the skills that you're going to need if you do separate or if you do go through a divorce, because when I was in that, there was nothing else left, right? Like there were no skills. It was just me protecting myself. I had lawyers. My lawyer, she was amazing. Her name was Lee. And, she told me to be prepared that he's going to kill my child because that was the closest thing to me. And like, I threw up on her wall. Sorry, Lee. Threw up on her wall, was in the bathroom for a while. So
do you feel like in retrospect, like she should have said that? Do you feel like that was a fair assessment of the situation? Yeah.
I had a lieutenant tell me the same thing.
Well, what about like if like how do people like even know where to go and find a therapist? Like, and
That's hard too,
Yeah.
right? it is like, so if of course, if people ever reach out to me, I'm happy to, hear their stories, because literally you're walking around and he's telling you you're crazy all the time. And my lawyer, Lee, this is how good he is, right? He's amazing. You go to court and I'm just like sitting in awe. I'm like, this is amazing. Like none of it's real. None of it's true, right?
Yeah.
But everybody else thinks it is.
It's a good presentation.
So Lee, the
Yeah.
lawyer, she apologized to me after she'd been my lawyer for 6 months. And she said, I thought you were the crazy one. And I thought he was telling the truth. But she said, but now I see it. When she said she sat in a room with him, she said, I see it now.
You're like, wait a minute, you thought I was crazy?
I know.
Why
I was
did
like,
tell
you
me
thought
that?"
I was lying. But it's true, right? It's like, hey, he's broken into my house twice. He's showing up here, showing up there. And they're like, oh, whatever, man. She's histrionic. And, and it's like, no, so yeah. So,
So therapy is definitely one, like before
think-
separation, if possible, if it's salvageable.
yes.
Therapy after as
Therapy
well.
during couples
Yeah.
therapy, right? Because
Yeah.
there's something with you, and hopefully maybe we can figure this out one
Mhm.
day. You may have saw that, what your wife said, but what's different about you that made you feel connected to what she was saying versus fuck her, she's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that is. And to me, that's a strength, right? Is that you're able to look inward and say, okay, wait a minute. How am I contributing to this situation? A lot of people who have really narcissistic traits, they don't have that ability to look into because they're afraid to. So all these veterans that are going to psychedelic retreats that may be quote unquote narcissistic, it could be that they're trained so much. Here's your mission and nobody else exists and you're leaving everybody else in the background. That's what makes me think, with your wife, like when you recognize that, but you're able to come back and say, okay, wait a minute. I love this person. This person's a good person, a good mom. Like, how can I help to pour into her cup that can help the entire situation? So that's a strength that a lot of people don't have. And I don't know why they don't have that.
Well, I mean, like on the psychedelic side of things, like for me, it was like, in some of my experiences, it was, like eternal death and separation, like from my wife and kids. And it was this feeling of like, that was like the greatest pain I would experience, not being able to see them again, not being able to, be in, community with them in their lives, and never getting to like have that love, like some kind of separation from it. And that's like a pretty extreme altered state of consciousness to exist in when you think that's your new reality. So then when you come back from that and you realize that that event has not occurred, and here you are in this physical reality with a wife and with children. And then of course there's many other things that happen, in these sessions. So being able to integrate that in to be like, okay, how am I going to show up and change? And I can say all the things in the world to try and make it better for her. But until I can actually be the change and the transformation and show her like over time how I'm different, like it's not going to truly resonate with her. And she's not going to be ready to receive any kind of like, healing or therapy from mending these wounds until like I can show her that I've mended like what's inside of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe there needs to be a playbook, right? For military guys and gals,
Yeah.
when they get out, like it's,
Well, and that's the
give
other
them
thing.
the
We looked
steps.
at a few articles like before, just kind of pulling it up, and some of the statistics, like 100,000 domestic violence incidents reported, I think since 2015. And that article was like CBS. It came out in 2021. And like that's, I'm sure that's just a small percentage of like what's being reported. And it was good to see, and maybe we can get the article and maybe link it, to so that folks can reference it, because there was some great conversations, some storylines like what we're talking about of what the spouses are going through when their significant other comes back from combat, but how they're finding each other and one another. And similar to how we created these organizations on the veteran mental health front, they're creating organizations and efforts to be able to help talk about this, to provide community and resources and get people the help they need through things like the military family advocacy, but other nonprofit groups. And I think that's the wonderful thing about our community is, for all the perils and things where we miss the mark and fall short, there's something about getting a solution or an answer and then turning around and helping the ones behind you, this kind of battle buddy kind of system in the Army, swim buddy in the Navy. But this thing of like nobody left behind. And I love that. And I think that that's the emerging thing that's really coming from our community that I want to, spotlight and focus on. 2015, when we started our nonprofit, it was very much this, just like this wartime culture, just like drinking bros, like type culture. And that's out there and you can plug in to that if you want. But I think that pathway over time leads to destruction, and it leads to the physical abuse, it leads to the psychological abuse, it leads to physical decay, of the body and disease and things. And our generation's tired of that. We're tired of these, lies that have been sold to us, and we're finding better, more healthy pathways to understand ourselves, our emotions, how we can maintain balance, like we talk about physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, what does that mean for the individual to be able to do that? And when I can do that, what can I be for my spouse and for my children, for my community, for the work that I do? And so it's a terrible thing, with the abuse and the violence that happens within our community, but it's also encouraging, to see how the narrative is transforming, and people that have gone through it, such as yourself, are stepping up to be, the out front leaders saying, no more, not on my watch. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, thinking about the highlights of like, what would I've done? What would have been great for me, like during that time? But my little book that I tell you, wish they would rename it. It was so significant. It was just like 90 pages when it first came out, but it was somebody who'd lived it, right? And they were able to put words with it. But you would read one sentence, and that one sentence, you'd read it like 4 times. And you're like, oh my gosh, I connect so well to this sentence. But the beautiful thing, right, about abuse is there's a pattern. And you don't feel like there's a pattern. It feels like it's all over the place. Everything's gray. But this book showed you green zone, yellow zone, red zone. And it showed like if there's a negative action, right, where like I was being taught a lesson. So like that's real time. But usually there would be a negative, something else negative that would happen in like 3 days. And usually it came in groups of 3. So if you're sitting there and you don't know, like, is it me? Is it them? Am I bringing it on myself? Like, what's going on, right? Is it psychological? Is it physical? Like, what is it? This book shows you there is a pattern, and that pattern is consistently consistent with the way abuse looks.
Do you remember what the book was called?
Psychopath-Free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the book.
Okay.
But yeah, so, so that book was amazing. I think the other thing that I did, Adam, I mean, you know my strength, right? I mean, I was sitting in a office with my now ex-husband, who's a heart surgeon, and this amazing lawyer who actually passed away by suicide. But I was sitting there, and I just knew, right, that these guys were like with the mafia, right? They're just badasses, right? I'm sitting there on a Sunday in Tom's office, and I'm shaking. Like my whole body is shaking because I'm scared to death of this man, right? And they're like, Tom's like, what's wrong? And he's like, why are you shaking? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, I just can't. Like, it was so much stress, right? I just couldn't handle it. And I did. I felt like I was like in this like shivering fear. And then Bill's like, she needs order of protection. And I think I got 3 emergency orders of protections, but they never let me have them permanent because I didn't show that I was scared enough. And, so Bill was like, she needs to order protection. He's like, why? He's like, he's going to kill you. He's going to kill you. I'm like, is this therapy with a lawyer and a heart surgeon? Like, what is this, And, so I was, anyway, talked to Tom and he did. He was like, here's what you do. You play your hand right. If you play your hand wrong, you die. You play your hand right, you live. And he's not wrong. Like there were so many things. So I went to therapy and learning, how do I deal with this? And how do I not die? And how do I make sure that my daughter doesn't die? Right. So it was like literally every move you're making, right, is to try to protect not only your life, but their life. And my husband, my ex-husband at the time, and he denies this, but I remember where I was sitting when he told me this because I called him and I was like, it was after the Tom meeting. It made me feel a little bit better, but then I was having one of my freak out moments again. And he said, and I don't know what I was saying, but he said, Katie, I need you to step back and pull your head out of your ass and reorient yourself. Otherwise, people are going to think you're nuts. And I was like, okay, I hear that. Like, but it was true, right? So what I did is, because I had such significant fear of this man. And maybe it's why now, right? Like, I'm just like, if I feel fear, I will face it head on because I do not like to feel fear. I don't like it taking anything away from me. And, with those pieces, even text messages, emails, like I literally have not said one sentence to this man since 2012. It's only been documentation. But I would get these long emails that were like 8 pages long. And I would be shaking. So it was a significant trauma response, I guess. So I would get the emails, I would get the texts, and I just couldn't. Like I'd want to throw up. I want to do all these different things. And so I had people around me that would look at them first, and they would give me like the clip notes, and then I would be able to look at it. But one thing, because I'm still in the domestic violence courts, which, this video, who knows, right? It could come back and bite me in the ass. But if it's to help save a life, then, hopefully it will. But I'm in those courts until my daughter turns 18, I guess. But one thing I told the judge, and this was an amazing protector, is I asked him if we could use SBAR documentation. So SBAR is actually the way that we give reports in the medical field, situation, background, assessment, recommendation. Because the emails and the text messages were destroying me, absolutely destroying me. And so the judge, actually, we started using SBAR several years ago, and you have to put it SBAR, and you put your little thing there. There's no emotions in SBAR. And that's what narcissists do, right? Is they see your emotions. They take all the vulnerabilities that you ever showed to them over time, and they use them to destroy you. SBAR, you can't do that. And if there's an emotion in it, I get to call it out, right? So and actually the judge told me when we went back again, he told me that he actually uses that in cases now that are very difficult. I know. I thought
improving the court systems along your healing journey as well.
Yeah. And then the other thing I did is when my daughter was 4, I went to a child psychologist, and fortunately by this time I still have all decision making for her. But I was able to go by myself without having his input to a child psychologist, and said, "Will you see my daughter?" And he's like, "What's wrong with her?" And I was like, "There's nothing wrong with her. It's the situation around her, right? I need her to learn tangible skills." So he saw her off and on from 4 years old until 10. And if you meet my daughter, she's amazing. Like, she has.
Yeah. So that's a really good point of like what the children like endure as part of that process.
Yep.
And how it works its way as they're developing and growing as part of their
huge
foundations.
Yep.
And this also gets into a little bit of like generational trauma, and where some of these things maybe were, passed down, from his parents in a way, and some of the things that
he went through significant trauma.
He saw.
Yes.
And you as well, right? And you're bringing your own things as well. And then it's like, if there's not some kind of, catalyst to change that and stop that, then it's going to continue to get passed on from generation to generation. And we see this like so much, like thinking that, I'm not gonna be like that. And then, they grow up and doing the exact same things that they hated about, their parents.
And that scared me for my daughter, because I was like, if she sees this, right? And that was the one thing the child psychologist, and amazing. I mean, just amazing, calm guy, right? And that's the other thing too. It's like my daughter feels safer with women than she does with men. So with men that I trust, I try to put them into her life to be around her so she can learn to trust.
Healthy male.
That's right. Healthy male relationships. Yeah. So, but he told me, he's like, there's 2 things that she needs. She needs to learn critical thinking skills, independent thinking, learning critical thinking skills, and empathy. And he said, you show her empathy, you teach her independent thinking, critical thinking skills, she's going to be just fine. And not only is she fine today, but she is amazing with not only managing my personality, but she manages her father's personality amazingly well. Because he actually gets her, 5 nights or every 2 weeks. But she knows his personality, and she knows that he loves her to the best ability that he knows how to love. And I have no doubt that he would kill anybody for that child now.
Yeah.
But it's been a hell of a ride.
And do you think those things like the empathy and the critical thinking, those were just unique to her? Nope. Or do you think that's
all children
in those?
So it doesn't matter if a child, because he was trying to tell me this, because this man he's a saint. Because my gosh, I would bring in emails. I was like, this is funny. So I used to bring in emails, and I'm a pretty good communicator, right? And if I'm not sitting there and I feel like I'm not communicating with you well, I'm still trying to understand like what's your communication language so I can try to change mine. So I would go to him and I'd bring these, 9-page emails, and I was like, okay, I tried what you told me to try, and it didn't work, And so he was like, okay, try this.
This was to the therapist?
Yeah, the child psychologist would meet with me as a parent in trying to help make the situation better from parent to parent. And he also offered to meet with her dad, which I think he did come in a couple of times, but not consistently. But one of the this is a big piece, Adam. None of the courts across the United States look at psychological abuse. Zero. It's not in the law. It's only physical abuse.
Do you think that's just because it's like it's so subjectively hard to like assess, or
probably? I mean, like I did have a meeting with a senator, and that's one of my life tasks. I want to do that is to put it into the court system because a lot of people would either be dead right now if they were in my situation, or the opposing party would be dead, one or the other. You know, but with those pieces, right, with the from the psychological piece is when you go up and you're trying to explain, even though the judge can hear it, he will tell you, I can't do anything about it. There's nothing in our laws that state that I can do anything about this. You know, so I get in trouble. I got in trouble. I've been in trouble in court before. I get called down. Ma'am, answer the question. I was like, they're like, why are you here?
I could see that.
They're like, why are you here?
I could see you being a challenge in the court.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Why are you here? Psychological abuse. Ma'am, why are you here? Psychological abuse. But yeah, no, but one of the things, right? So this is what happens in court. And when you read in that book, The Psychopath-Free, it will tell you that the pretty high percentage of people that go through situations that I went through, they lose their children to the opposing party. And so that was something, you know, that I had to also come to grips with, you know, the possibility of. And so it was, I was telling them yesterday, you've heard my story, my week when the universe kicked my ass and I had to go to court on Wednesday for jail time. So here I am working with this child psychologist for years on how can I communicate better? How do I keep her protected? How do I keep everything safe, right? And finally, the child psychologist said, okay, nothing we've done is working. I want you to respond to his emails with 4 words. Yes, no, okay, I'm sorry you're frustrated. And that's it. Nothing else. I was like, okay, got it. So Katie gets taken back to court and he requests that I go to jail on 77 criminal contempts. He wants me to go to jail 10 days for each of those. For every time I said, yes, no, okay, I'm sorry you're frustrated. And I was trying to tell them, this is what the child psychologist told me to do. The child psychologist didn't have time to come in and actually testify that he told me to do that. So I had to sit in court for 3 days, over 77 emails, and I had to counteract each of those emails for 3 days, $15,000. And, you know, so I'm sitting there with my lawyer. I'm like, okay, hold on. Like, I can block things out pretty well. Like, I can function pretty well. Do you understand the ability or the inability, right? If I'm sitting up there for 3 days in front of my abuser, he's trying to put me in jail for 3 years over emails. Do you understand how traumatizing that is to the person that's testifying?
You need therapy just from the court sessions.
Oh, 100%, right? But think about kids, right? And they do this. Like one of my friends is she does sex trafficking and she's amazing. But she's an international expert. She's got 2 doctorates as a forensic psychologist. And she said one of the worst things, right? Those kids have to get in front of their abusers and they have to testify against them.
That's terrible.
That's across the world. And she said, so if you want to talk about real life PTSD, she said, find a child that's been raped 10 times and you have to get that child in front of each of their perpetrators. And that child has to testify.
That's absolutely terrible.
Horrible.
There's got to be a better way.
Absolutely. But nobody's building it because nobody's seen it, right? Nobody's been in it. You know, and that's, you know, I do have friends that are judges and senators and things like that. And I'm happy to build my personal recommendation. Because everybody's like, oh, it gets so confusing. Nobody knows who's right. I'm like, up front, if there's an accusation of any type of abuse, do a psychological evaluation. Up front, stage 1. And my lawyer did not want me to do a psychological evaluation. He's like, I don't know if you're going to be nuts. And I'm like, well, I'm going to give it a shot, right? So we do a psych evaluation. But
on you.
Oh, yeah. So when you request one, everybody gets one, right? So he's like, no, you don't want to request that because you don't know if your client is actually crazy. I'm like, well, it's going to give everybody more direction, right? And fortunately, And I've got it on paper. It said I was pretty normal. It said I would distract from like heavier topics,
Yeah.
emotional topics, which is probably a sign of trauma.
There you
But
go. Katie's not crazy, everybody.
I have it on paper. Um, but yeah, but that's how you solve it. Domestic violence. You go in looking at those pieces from that standpoint, because how much money has the courts wasted on this stupid situation, and it's just two headstrong people
Right.
that are here trying to protect this
So
child
much.
that they're destroying potentially.
Yeah, not even that. Like even just consumed in divorces
Yeah.
and what all that leads to.
Yep.
I mean, it's such a terrible thing for anybody to experience, and so many people are experiencing on one side, or the other. And I just think it's really like brave of you to be out front, like sharing, that journey and what you've been through, like what those experiences were like, how you were questioning like yourself along the way, but then like how you also took a stand for yourself, as painful like as that was, with the things, all the things you had going on, from raising your young daughter to being in anesthesia school, and then this like slow process of like learning more, like healing more, like journeying into like this new and better you. And I think like there's hope for anybody that's going through this, no matter like what stage you're in. And it's great that there's more like books that helped you along the way, and there's organizations coming out to be able to provide community and support and some like pathways. I mean, I heard like you got expert legal counsel, then they were able to advise you, and then you started putting some of those things in practice. They gave you some different perspectives and tool sets on like how to move through things, like looking at your daughter and the impact it had on her, and being able to recognize that and get the care and support that she needs so that she can grow into the beautiful person that she needs to be. And how much that is healing in your own way, for knowing that now I've done everything I can do within that regard. And then just like still acknowledging that it's still a challenge that doesn't go away, and it's very much a part of my story. I don't have to be ashamed of it. I don't have to run from it. I can look at it in a positive way, while also shedding tears for all the sad parts along the way, but like existing right now with a sense of gratitude. And maybe for somebody who's like really in the throes of it, it's really hard to see that. And I think that like your story, and others like it, are so inspiring and needed, in the public discourse and conversation, so that people have something to be able to say like, oh, well, if Katie's not crazy, and
Send me the papers.
and
I
she
don't
was
believe
able
it.
to make it through, but in all seriousness, then there's hope, for me too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like thank you for sharing, and it's like shedding so much light, on this topic today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So here's the things I would say, right, that were my most protective. One, that book, swear
Yeah.
it saved my life. 2, SBAR, communication,
Yeah, I
effective
like that.
communication, getting it back and forth,
Which was what again? Situation.
background assessment recommendation.
Yeah.
Getting a therapist for your child. There's nothing wrong with your child. It's learning that child can, teaching them how to play with the cards that they have, right? How are they going to manufacture? How are they still going to make sure that dad loves them, mom loves them, and feel that? And then one thing I did, I still do this, right? Because me, I'm extremely animated.
You are?
I know. But around him, I am not at all. And, because I have 3 Great Danes, and my Great Danes are a huge safety of mine, right? So like with him, like, because we have to drop off at a mutual location. He actually doesn't come to my home. And so I always have a Great Dane, typically. And now I'm better at it, but for a while I would always have a Great Dane. They're trained off leash, right? So they stand next to me. Yeah. And then I always have glasses and a hat. And no facial expression, because, I know this is weird, but this is something good to know too. He called me out on this in court one time, and I was like, he's right, I am doing that. He said, she can't even look me in the eyes. And a sign of abuse is someone can't look their abuser in the eyes because it's too much vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I still can't look him in the eyes today. I
Mm.
look at his shoulder or his elbow or his forehead.
Yeah.
Like I don't, and it's not a voluntary action. It's an involuntary action.
Wow.
But yeah, so now I'm like, fuck you, like I'm gonna look him in the eyes. Like he's not gonna show me, But it was
I'm gonna give him
interesting.
laser eyes.
Right. I'm gonna stare at him. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, but my hat and sunglasses and my dog, like it's,
Yeah.
it's a huge, even if it's just something little, it's something so powerful, So I think if somebody, is
Well,
going through,
it's something to give you like power back, I
yeah,
think is what it do. And it's preventing
it's
like
some type of
yeah,
boundary.
it's creating a
boundary.
barrier, a
Yeah,
boundary.
yeah.
Yeah.
So those would be my things, right? It's like get the book,
Yeah.
look at S-bar communication, have your glasses, have your hat, have your
Mhm.
dog, and have no facial
Yeah.
expressions. Become,
Yeah.
poker face.
Right.
Because you went to this dark place with somebody that you loved tremendously, and they took advantage of every vulnerability that you had in trying to destroy you in order to protect themselves. So that's really what we need to look at is how do we stop that? How do we solve it? How do we integrate it? And how do we prevent generational trauma? Exactly what you just said.
Well, what's the last thing that you would maybe say to somebody if they're like in the middle of it, like right now? Like what would just kind of be like your little PSA to them?
I would tell them that if they would like to get in touch with me, they can. And my email is katherinewalker@revitalist.com. And I would help to put them in a direction, point them in a direction of trying to hear their situation. I would tell them that it's normal to be scared. And that's okay, right? To be scared. Because it's, it's not you being overly sensitive. It's your body recognizing that there is something wrong. So to be scared, but to have the bravery, my personal opinion, and I know everybody's situation's different, but have the bravery to stand up for yourself. But also recognizing, there is risk there. And, having strong people around you, right? So me personally, if I would have redone all of this, I would have kept my damn mouth shut while I was coming up with a good plan on how to get out, right? But
Yeah.
no, whenever it was like, oh, you're going to teach me a lesson. Okay, I'm done, dude. I'm
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
And it's like, stop arguing. There's no reason to argue with a
Mhm.
grandiose narcissist. Zero. Because you're making their tail feathers
Mhm.
go up and you're putting yourself at greater risk. So if you keep your mouth shut, you come up with a good plan, you read the book, you come up with all of this, you get the strategy to go into a therapist as couples so you could try to learn these different things. And you in the back of your mind, like you probably are going to leave, but you're trying to make the situation as beautiful as possible before you exit. That's where I messed up. I exited and I
Yeah.
just blew everything up and it was just
Yeah.
not good on either side. But yeah, and I do, I hope there's hope for him. He's only 2 years older than me, but, I hope that he can heal, in a certain way. I hope for his, own peace. But yeah, he's married again, he's been married for a long time and he seemed to have a, a good family life and different things like that. So it's not necessarily the person. Sometimes it's the situation. Sometimes it's the personalities, and we have to be willing to, be open to that without recognizing that we may feel like it's going to shatter us. And I think that's why a lot of narcissists don't open up. They're too afraid to what they might find. And as we all know with psychedelics, you shouldn't be afraid of what you're going to find. It's an amazing
lean into it.
discovery. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an amazing discovery, and you learn to walk with it, and then you become that awesome, empowered, loving, healing self that you've been looking for, that you didn't know was there, and it's always been there. But you just have to have the strength to search it out.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation,
I do too.
especially for being ill prepared. Like I don't think
you did great, Adam.
I don't think it could have gone any better. And I think it's because you're, so vulnerable and authentic and sharing your personal story. And it also like helped allow me to really kind of look introspectively and
Yeah.
and historically in some of the things that, I knew and had been through. And there's parts where, I've been on the recipient end, of some of these things that we're talking about. And I think like that's just like the human experience, right? And I just think the last thing I would say from like a PSA perspective, maybe on the more corny side of things, but like truly, sincerely meaning it with everything inside of me, is that, you are loved. You're worthy of being loved. And you're worthy of having like a healthy, loving relationship. And this is for, for you, but for the listeners too. And that there's like, if you're in the throes of it right now, like there's hope for like a future in which the things you're experiencing right now, you're on the other side of that. And I think your story was so great in helping people understand that that's a realistic, kind of vision for the future.
Well, thank you. And one last thing, talking about when people call you a narcissist, or when they call you anything, right? Anything that may be negative, that's not a black and white label. So two things I tell people is the impression and interpretation. And I try to keep that in my mind, impression and interpretation. So it's like if somebody called me a narcissist, which I don't know, I'm sure people have called me a lot of things. They probably call me everything. What I like to do, instead of being like, no, I'm not that. I know I'm not that. I'm an empath, if anything, right? What I like to do is I like to say, to people, it's like, okay, like, what did I do to make you feel that way? So I'm asking them, right? So something I did, it could have been my language, it could have been my body language, it could have been whatever, right? What did I do that gave that person the impression and the interpretation, that I was a narcissist? And if I can hear what I did to give them that impression, then I can change the way that I present myself so they won't interpret my behavior that way, because more than likely I wasn't doing that to give them the impression that I was a narcissist, but that was the way that they interpreted my behavior. So if I hear that on anything, right, then it helps me to kind of like rebalance that. So it's like impression, interpretation, like what was that? And then that way nobody's right and nobody's wrong. It's just the way that they took in my actions or my words gave them that impression. And that impression probably came from something in their past when they did deal with a narcissistic person, and something that, is a crossover, right? So I think that helps a lot, especially with domestic situations. It's like, what's the impression that they gave you? And then why do you think you interpret it that way? And if you go to that person, instead of being like, you're a narcissist, if you go to them and say, okay, when you acted this way, it gave me the impression of this, and this is the way I interpreted it. It's a kinder way to address things, more specifically, instead of saying something that makes everyone feel defensive until, well, they're shut down.
Well, if you can move, I think maybe moving away from like the polarity and the duality of like right and wrong. Like, you are right, I'm wrong. This is my point. You're not seeing to, versus like expressing oneself and like what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and trying to ask questions to understand from the other person's perspective. And if you can go from like, I'm expressing in this way, and then I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to receive, and allowing the other person to express, and then it's, what are the ways in which you're going to move forward like together. But if you stay in this like binary duality of like right and wrong, then you're going to never be able to get on the same page. So just knowing like, there's a way in which I can share and inquire and seek to gain a deeper understanding, realizing that this is this person's worldview inside their head, like of me. And I don't necessarily have to accept all these things, but I should at least consider them and evaluate them, and then determine if I need to take some kind of like action. And like, that's a very healthy way to move through it.
And I think the balance of I'm sorry, right? Because it's like, if there's one side that always says I'm sorry and the other side never says that, like that's an imbalanced situation. So if he's, you're not apologizing for the person that you are, but you're apologizing maybe for the situation. But it's like, okay, I'm sorry. I understand how I could make you feel that way.
So you're saying don't marry a Canadian.
Sorry. Yeah.
But they apologize for everything. Like, hey, stop apologizing. What are you doing? I didn't. You didn't do it. You didn't do anything. It's very imbalanced in this relationship.
Somebody taught them.
Yeah.
Actually, you should marry a Canadian, because they're saying you're always right.
No, I love all my Canadian friends.
Touche. But there's a healthier way to do it, and and maybe we talk about this more, because people aren't talking about, they're like, here's how you can get help. Here's where you go. I hear that, I really do. But when you go to these certain places and you ask for help, they're not always on your same level as to what you need, right? And you do have a lot more control than what you think you do. You just, like I said, you got to play your cards right. And, and do it in a way, like learn from my mistakes and learn from my triumphs too, right? Learn from both. Be sure to, pick the hand that you want to play instead of, kind of blowing things up. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Doing our first podcast on domestic
In the books.
violence.
Let's go.
Game on.
I'm introducing you now to Lion's Mane. Lion's Mane is amazing for cognitive improvement. If you are feeling kind of fuzzy, grayed out, you need more focus, Lion's Mane is an excellent option. They're even utilizing the substance with pediatrics as young as 4 years old. So you have a kid who's starting to, you're worried about behavioral issues and such, look up Lion's Mane. It's a natural supplement and it's allowing improvement in your cognitive function.